Welcome in, Shield Brothers and Shield Maidens, to Shield's Rest. I'm Brown.
Fry.
Today we're going to be doing our sixth video on the DC20 playtest rules review. Again, we appreciate you for joining us and for engaging with us in the community. In this video, we're going to be talking about DCs within DC20 and also checks and saves. So to start, we'll see what Fry can tell us about the buy five rule that kind of goes throughout the system.
Yeah, so your buy five rules is kind of self-explanatory, right? It's you setting your checks and the difficulty encounters by increments of 5. So you have what's called a difficulty class. That's gonna be called like DC. You're gonna hear that phrase a lot. It's in the system. And the default DC is going to be a DC 10. So that's like a moderate task, moderate difficulty. And you're going to adjust that up and down as you need to create an easier or more difficult task. So a little example I have is if you're a ranger, right, and you're trying to track an animal down, you're going to roll your like a survival check, tracking check. DC 10 is just going to be like your moderate. Hey, this is what you need to roll to just find it. You need to make it a little more difficult. Say you're tracking this animal at night, so now we're going to bump it up to 15. And then say it's also raining at the time, the ground's getting muddy and all that stuff. Well, now the DC is 20. And what if it's a well traversed area? Maybe it's a highly populated forest with a lot of different creatures, and you're looking for one specific one. Well, that's going to bump it up to 25. And then finally, maybe the creature you're tracking has wings and it alternates between walking and flying. And now we're getting up to 30. So you're just, as you are doing something more and more difficult, that DC is going to go up. And typically it's going to go by fives. And that's where that by five rule comes from.
Yeah,
And
I
there's
think
also,
that's a great example you're given with kind of how
yeah,
the degrees go up, and that's something you can use in your brain on the fly to adjust the scenario. Because mostly in tabletop role playing games, you're thinking on the fly, and that's a good way to have it structured in your brain. So
absolutely. Yeah. It's just for every, like, everything against them, just add an extra five to the DC. Quick and
yeah,
easy. But then you have with that comes degrees of success and failure, right? So I'll let Mark kind of jump into that and like what that means, have different degrees of it.
yeah, and so essentially, like what he was saying. So let's say that you're gonna roll a check against something. If you succeed by five, then something additional happens, and even further, if you succeed by 10, something even additional happens. So kind of the reverse of his scenario with the difficulty class of being able to have it more difficult based on the situation or the surroundings. Same thing applies for a check. So uh, normally in this game system, you would call that out like success by five or success by 10. That would help your game master to understand like the level or degree of success or also failure that you get with your roll. This can also be used for certain things, right? So the example we have here is something called analyze creature. So you can spend one action point to attempt to recall or discern information about a creature that you can see or hear. So let's say that's a base DC 10 knowledge check, but if you succeed by five, then you could also learn one statistic about the creature, like what's its physical defense or what attack it might have. If you succeed by 10, then you might even see something further. Um, and then there's also another thing you can use called combat insight. For I'll let you talk on that one a little bit.
So for combat insight, you can make an insight check contested by their trickery or their influence, their choice. If you succeed, you learn that target's emotional state and whether it plans to make an attack, cast a spell, flee, whatever it's about to do. If you succeed by five, you know who that creature is going to target with that. And if you succeed by 10, you know which ability they plan on using. So it's an additional way, not only so you have your like your buy fives and all that, but this one, as you succeed more, you're getting more information out of it.
Yeah, I really like the way that works. If you can spend one action point and succeed in such a way that hey, they're about to attack, they're about to attack Fry. I typically like to play those more like support, defensive, utility type classes. So if I have the information they're going to attack Fry with their next attack, that helps me to be able to, use my play style to do something in favor of him in advance of that. So I think that type of knowledge has a big play in this, and the way that you get that great success and the level of degree of it can really impact the way that the whole team is operating in like a combat scenario specifically.
Yeah, it really
There's
just makes
also
combat more than just like I swing my big sword and hit. Oh, I
yeah,
missed. Well, oh well. It gives you more options to kind of be strategic and do.
yes,
It just makes it more exciting. It gives you so many more options.
yeah, I love the tactical flexibility as well in the combat. Um, and then inversely, there's failing on a check again by those same degrees. So just example we have here, a collapsing roof, right? So if you trip a wire, you make a DC 15. If you just regular fail, the trap stays there. If you fail by 5, the trap triggers. If you fail by 10, your lock picking tools or whatever you're using to try to disable the trap break. So it's that type of um, it adds that type of element to the way that you're making those checks. So there's degrees that impact the result. It's not just a flat this happens or that happens. Like
Yeah, and you can
when
even so you can even take it a step further and like say that trap does trigger. You have again, you can start at that 15 because we're in something detrimental and you're right there on it. You can if you fail, you take some damage, and for every 5 you fail additional, you could be taking even more damage. So it's a way to actually it's not just a oh you failed and that's that. No, it's how much did you fail by, and it could trigger something even worse. So there are a lot of benefits to having those like by 5 rules to keep that like dynamic play.
yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of that in a nutshell, and then we'll transition a little bit and we'll talk about criticals and like the effect of those. Um, so we'll get into that here in just a second. We'll jump up to the other chapter.
All right, so coming up on criticals, we have first up is a critical success. That's when you roll the d20 and you roll 20 on the die. Um, for attacks and your spell checks, if they're damaging abilities, you get an automatic +2 to the damage of whatever you're doing. And if it has an on hit effect, that whatever that effect is, maybe it's holding the creature or knocking it prone or anything like that, that's going to automatically succeed, even if the numerical outcome would have been a failure. Um, and then with your saves, your skills, and your trade checks, kind of the same thing. It's automatically going to succeed, even if normally that numerical value will fail. So maybe you're trying to do something that's normally out of reach for your character. And it's like the DC is 30, right? And with your +5 to the scale, even with a nat 20, you're only rolling a 25, but because you got that natural 20, you're going to automatically succeed on that. So that's where it's very important when you're DMing in this system. Do not ask for a check if it is not possible at all, because if they roll that
Mm,
20, by
yeah,
the rules, they're supposed to succeed.
it's happening.
Um,
Yeah,
the one I always like to use, you'll probably use it a lot, is oh, I want to try and jump to the moon. Don't let them roll it, because if you roll 20, all of a sudden that character's gone. Um, now you got a whole new story to run.
yeah, they're on the moon. You got to go rescue them.
Yeah,
uh, Flipping the coin to critical failures, right? So kind of the same thing you would think of. It's going to mean that you automatically miss or fail that attack. One of the biggest things is here with the spell checks. So you actually will lose your AP spent, your MP spent. Other resources aren't affected, but your AP and MP you would lose from a failure, where normally you would, if you just straight up miss, there's a little bit of a difference there. Also, creatures gain the exposed condition until the end of their turn, being you, the one who failed. And then your saves, skills, and trade checks, obviously they fail regardless of the outcome. Just like the jump to the moon example, you're not going to be able to complete any task with a critical fail. And then there's also this piece down here called a contested critical outcome, which is here, which is whenever multiple creatures gain a critical success in a contest, or they all suffer a critical fail, the one with the highest result wins the contest. So both people can't fail or succeed. It's one, only one of them.
absolutely. And then kind of the same thing, like on that fail, don't ask them to roll a check for something they should just be able to do, right? And so if it's like walking up the stairs, don't make them do an agility check to walk upstairs and then they fail because normal everybody can walk upstairs. Um, and another tidbit too, if you're running a game and there's like a key piece that you like, I need my characters to find that. Don't hide it behind a check like that because now if they fail, it's gone forever.
Yeah,
Um, So yeah, I've had that happen in a game before, and
Yeah.
I had to do some juggling story wise to get that item back into their hands.
Same. Yeah, that's the worst when you're like, oh, now I gotta flex on the fly and like weave that in somewhere else, and yeah, that's terrible. So
She's like, I got 5 players, they can't all fail, and they do every time.
yeah, then they start splitting the party and running off, and yeah, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
But next we're gonna talk about advantage and disadvantage. Let me jump over to that page. All right, so with advantage and disadvantage works very similar to D&D 5e in a sense where if you have advantage, you just get an additional d20, you roll both the results and you keep the higher. Same thing with disadvantage, you roll two d20s, keep the lower. The way that you can gain advantage is going to be when you make a check or a save, you can spend an action point to gain advantage on that per AP spent, which leads into stacking advantage. Fry, I'll let you
Yeah,
talk about
so
that.
and in this one, you can have multiple sources of both advantage and disadvantage, and they will stack. So if you're looking at like D&D, uh, typically by the rules, if you have 3 sources of advantage, it just counts it as one, and
Mm.
you'll roll your 2d20s and take it. Same thing with disadvantage. And if you have one of each, they'll always cancel out. So even if you have like 2, 3 advantage, one disadvantage, they'll even out. It's a straight roll. So for this, you can stack them. Going back to what Mark said, so that means if you spend 2 AP for your attack, you'll have 2 additional d20, so 3 total. And how you're going to see that marked on things is where it'll say advantage X, where X is the number of additional dice you roll. So advantage 1 additional die, so you're rolling 2. Advantage 2, you're rolling 2 additional, so 3 total. And same thing for disadvantage. And then where that comes into play is combining those to see how many dice you roll. Mark, if you want to take that one away.
Yeah, combining is pretty simple. So that's basically, let's say you have two advantage and also two disadvantage. You don't then roll, three dice for each one. You just cancel those out. So whatever the end result would be. So if you have two advantage, three disadvantage, then you just have one disadvantage. So you would go back to your kind of normal roll of 2d20, take the lower. So that's a difference. You can stack all advantage, stack all disadvantage, but if you have both advantage and disadvantage, they cancel out. So whichever one you have more of just results in basically a normal roll essentially.
Yeah, and then the headache starts to come when you have where it has that variable disadvantage roll on that same page is you have like
Oh yeah.
straight rolls on some, advantage rolls on some, disadvantage rolls on some, and there's some overlap and there's some isn't. So it can get a little crazy and hectic. So be prepared to draw a map out of your entire field and be ready.
Yeah, but we all love to have advantage, right? So
Yeah,
I'll be willing to do that math to get the advantage in the
yeah,
end.
absolutely.
Um, and there's also something in this game system called a multiple check penalty, which we'll get into that now. How that works when you use your action points to make multiple checks against the same thing. We forgot, so we're going to pause to also throw in a plug for fellow YouTube creator and DC20 developer Claudio Wild. He puts out some really good videos on his YouTube, so please go and check him out as well.
Yeah, his most recent videos, it was he went over the math on all the advantage and disadvantages. So he gets down into the percentages and the increases and decreases depending on how many dice you're rolling. So if you like that aspect and really getting into the crunchy side of it, definitely go check that out.
The science behind it.
Yeah. So with the multiple check penalty, during combat, whenever a creature does the same action multiple times, they're gonna have a stacking disadvantage. So the big common one is gonna be your attack checks, right? So you spend your 1 AP, you do make an attack, you go to make a second attack, you spend that second AP, that second attack is now gonna have disadvantage. Same thing if you spend a third AP for a third attack. Now you're gonna have a double disadvantage on it rolling those 3 dice. So it's gonna keep stacking for every time you do the same check multiple times on your turn. On your turn is important because if you have a reaction on another creature's turn to make an attack, that one will not have disadvantage. Okay, so it's just what's going on your turn and for the action points that you spend on your turn.
Yeah, I think that's good to understand too, because it's not like a permanent thing for your whole round. Where sometimes in Dungeons and Dragons, for example, you would get disadvantage for your turn, so it would apply could sometimes apply to multiple situations. There's
Yep.
also other things in this system, like with the help action, they have their own multiple penalty. So With the help action, you would grant a D8 to your ally. If you wanted to do that twice, the next dice would be a D6. A third time, it would be a D4. So that has its own rules and mechanics in itself. So different than this multiple check penalty as listed. I think for our next video, we're going to be trying to look into maneuvers and techniques. That way we can get into some of the things that are available to the classes. And again, we still want to do more class builds or race builds so you can see what they're capable of, and you'll be already familiar with maneuvers and techniques. So as we get into those builds, it's not brand new and difficult to follow. That might be the next video we do. So
I like what they bring to the martial class. I think in a lot of TTRPGs and stuff, spellcasters always shine really on all the way through, and this is kind of like martial version of spellcasting. So we'll be really excited to get in there and show y'all what martials can do. They're definitely not pushovers in this one.
yeah, it's spellcasting too. We're kind of saving that piece for later because it's still kind of being fleshed out a little bit. But so
Mhm.
expect spellcasting last, but I do like the martial and spellcasting differences in this system. They definitely feel much more impactful, um, at least from my own experience of tabletop RPGs. So, but yeah, please continue to engage with us in the community. We look forward to hearing from you, and also please let us know if you have any feedback or if you want to see specific videos or topics, and we'll definitely make sure to put effort in addressing those. Until next time, keep the shield wall strong.
Take care.